Hello to everybody. It's wonderful to see you all. Thanks for taking the time to participate. Look, I feel very conflicted in some ways in terms of this conversation, and I think I have to be honest about that because I'm a great lover of this curriculum, and have been a huge advocate and huge supporter of this New Zealand curriculum through the years. I think we need to cast our mind back to where we were prior to 2007 with the former curriculum, which was one that was jammed, crowded with achievement objectives, and was very demanding of teachers in terms of what it required of them. I think where we found ourselves at curriculum design time was around the opportunity to construct a curriculum that reflected the fact that knowledge was a verb, not necessarily a noun as well. So in other words, that knowledge was ubiquitous, it was everywhere, it was turning over quickly, that we shouldn't make the mistake of just investing in teaching certain sorts of knowledge because we would miss the fact that the world is changing rapidly and we needed to teach young people to learn how to learn in order for them to develop the capabilities of being lifelong learners. I don't think any of that reality has changed. I think that's true now as it was 10 years ago. And so what I think came about was this wonderful New Zealand curriculum that had this incredible sort of handshake between broad and generic curriculum goals, purposely designed so that we could take those goals into our local situations with young people and combine them with their interests and in contexts that were meaningful for young people, and build curriculum that is engaging and exciting and relevant and has meaning for young people in partnership with teachers. And I think that intention was wonderful, really a stunning idea. In fact, really quite a brave idea when you think of what curriculums look like around the world. Sadly, pretty soon after we had that set of permissions, we dived into the introduction of national education standards. And the national standards has, of course, a very strong kaupapa, a very strong sense that learning is about a lockstep march towards a certain endpoint for every student at every age and stage of schooling. An anathema in many ways to the sort of freedom and creativity of the New Zealand curriculum. I think it was very sad that occurred, of course, because what happened was a real lack of professional learning, a real lack of support, a real lack of focus on how we could be really brave as a profession and breathe life into the New Zealand curriculum. I think we find ourselves, 10, 12, 13 years down the track now, and every year I think we've talked about finding ways to better depth the New Zealand curriculum, but perhaps increasingly becoming aware that we have a challenge, and the challenge is really centred around this idea of the curriculum encouraging us to be very locally focused on making meaning locally, which of course has significant relevance. The great challenge with being locally focused and decentralising curriculum, of course, is that it has the potential to lack coherence nationally. And in a national system of education where as a country we have an important goal to pull together for certain things, certain ideas, certain outcomes, there is the potential for that to be lost, to be damaged. So I think the question really at this point as a profession, as we look at some of the challenges we're starting to notice with student achievement, and of course, we look at some of the measures we use, and we know that we engage, like every other country in the OECD, in our international assessments. Of course, I'm not at all interested in the league tables that really are quite meaningless in terms of the impact for cultural context and countries' context to be influential on that data. But I am more interested in the map of our own achievement over the years, because I think that has more meaning, how we've performed against our own pattern of achievement. And I get really, really interested when we talk about the pattern of achievement in the National Monitoring Project, because that's really grunty, great situational, Kiwi-based assessment that has really good efficacy and has high confidence in our sector. And we've noticed, of course, over time that we've got more and more serious concerns regarding the quality of the achievement data relative to the National Monitoring Project. I think there's enough information at this point for us to be able to raise a red flag and go, you know what, we've got to look more closely at what might be happening and how we might choose to respond. The question, I think, has been around for quite a number of years around how we might nurture the New Zealand curriculum, nurture the lovely focus on localising it, on building relevant contexts alongside young people, not throw that out, but also try and rebalance the important goals that we have as an education system nationally and get clearer about what those are for our teachers. I personally, in my work as a teacher and as a principal, have never believed that because I'm student focused, encourage agency in young people and have a strong sense that learning needs to be at the heart and all of its diversity of what takes place in education, that being more strongly focused as a teacher around what I want my young people to learn and what my intentions are as a teacher, what my goals are and what the outcomes are that I want to teach, that is in any way going to disenfranchise young people. I think over the years, we've become a little bit too focused on the notion of learning taking precedence over the notion of teaching. I think both are important. It's not one or the other. They have to work in combination together. You may, of course, be aware of Professor Gert Biester's work around the learnification of our education system. And he makes this point beautifully, actually, that we've become very focused on learners to the detriment of understanding the power and the pace and the precision of teaching. And we need, I think, to do a better job at rediscovering the handshake that takes place between learning and teaching. And as I've said, I'm not one to believe that the quality and the precision of our teaching goals are any less important in this environment of activating the New Zealand curriculum. I think where we may struggle is being clear as teachers about what's required of us in the curriculum. And I think that's where a generic curriculum struggles. We want it to be generic so we can localise it, but we don't want it to be so generic that it creates difficulties with us as professionals making sense of what it requires of us as professionals and in a national system of education. I think there's growing concern that we rebalance this, that we talk more about what our curriculum means to us. The Minister Hipkins, is on record, of course, as saying it's the learning that can't be left to chance. You know, what is it? Getting clear about that, the understandings that we want to grow in our young people, what it is that we need them to know relative to those understandings and be able to do. I think there's scope, in my deep love of this curriculum, scope for this to be a goal for us in this work to refresh the curriculum. We have to bring forward, though, the danger. the risk, because I think the risk in this is that we do what we do all the time in education. And that is, when we start talking about one thing, we push that pendulum all the way to the other end of the continuum, making the mistake that that we want a tightly prescribed and rigorous curriculum. And of course, that's not what we want. I think we want to strike a balance between the need to be clear, but the need to deploy curriculum in a way that is relevant and meaningful to young people. I think that is the challenge of teaching. But I do believe that there is a job as a profession now for us to take a lead in helping our Ministry of Education understand what we require. I was a bit disappointed in some ways to hear the Ministry announce the expert advisory group in the maths curriculum. And when I worked through the experts advising the Ministry, I couldn't find one practicing lead teacher, principal, or expert in the school setting. And I think we have to be very careful we don't cede our leadership of this curriculum refresh to our academic friends, who of course play an important role. But again, it has to be a partnership between research and the guidance that research can provide, but very clearly the conversation, the expertise, the direction that we as practicing leaders and experts need to bring to this piece of work. That this is vital. So in many respects, your conversation today is so important, and it's really, I'm super excited about it, because I'm desperately keen to see your challenges, your ideas, your push around where you want to grow this, where you think this might go. And look, if you think indeed it's important, you might have a contrary view, and we need to hear all views as we kind of work out how we move forward and where we go with this. I'll just finish before we push on and Carolyn takes us forward. I remember many years ago when I was a young fella in school, one of the most powerful pieces of learning I did was on the age-old topic of the rocky shore. You probably all remember the rocky shore because it was in the curriculum and we all did it. There wasn't any choice about that context. It was something that you just had to have a look at. I remember having a teacher when I was in Standard 4, Year 6 at the time, who taught that, and he was a passionate scientist. He knew the content of the rocky shore inside out. And I remember going down to the beach on the field trip with the class, and I remember just jaw-dropping fascination at what he knew and how he designed his teaching to help us attack problems and wonderings and inquiry about the rocky shore and what we were experiencing, uncovering and discovering. I think that little vignette in itself, I think, is exciting for me as an educator, because I think we should not undervalue the importance of deep knowledge. Deep knowledge is what many young people don't have in their toolkit. They're young, they're growing into their understanding of the world. And it is our job to curate that knowledge and help them find the beauty, find the wonderment, and find the exposure to ideas that comes from the exploration of important knowledge. And so this idea of how we help our New Zealand curriculum be much clearer to teachers, so we can power our teachers up to be the pedagogical experts they are, and then deploy the pedagogy that engages young people, that encourages questions, that grows the inquiry mindset, but that ultimately helps them learn some of this really important learning that we cannot leave to chance. I think that's the opportunity. But of course, doing so in an environment where we are not going to damage that relevance that we need to grow from giving student power and voice in their learning. That's the New Zealand way, and we will never let go of that. So there we go. There's a good challenge for us all. I'm really interested to see where the conversation takes us from here. One of the things that is talked about a lot is this need for improvement. So, this question of what is it that might need improvement, if you agree indeed that improvement is required. I think we often find there are challenges with the NZC around the notion of curriculums that are particularly knowledge-rich, curriculums that have a deep knowledge base to it. You might think of the science curriculum in particular as one that has a good deal of specificity around the knowledge requirements in that curriculum. And the question about whether or not the NZC, really depths those goals, those expectations to a degree that enables a teacher to be really clear about what it is that they bring through to their students. The other area that we often hear about is really around what the curriculum requires in terms of coverage. Coverage was a really big issue in the previous curriculum, the one before 2007. We were all scurrying around like sort of headless chooks, seeking to tick off every single achievement objective, and it created a really busy, top-down, curriculum-driven style of learning in our schools, and we absolutely want to avoid that sort of idea. We also want to be clear, though, that the curriculum is important and that it needs to be delivered, needs to be supported. I often come across schools that think that localisation is about choosing what parts of the curriculum can be taught and what parts can be left alone. And I think that very notion in itself is problematic when we think about the national agreement that a curriculum has around what it is we focus in on. So this idea of, is this required of professionals, or does localisation mean that we can pick and choose? Is something that we're not clear on as a profession, and I think we need to be. There's a couple of really good examples that kind of paint the picture of the challenge I think that we have, and it's particularly connected to the environment that we work in, where we really struggle to have any high-level curriculum and pedagogical leadership that drives high-level goals in education. We get it in the kind of nuts and bolts of schooling, but we don't get it in teaching and learning and in curriculum to the extent that we should. So here's 3 examples just to help you understand the challenge that I see presenting in curriculum. The first is the numeracy project. Now, you'll remember that the numeracy project was launched by the Ministry of Education right back in the early 2000s, actually, and there was professional learning provided through the motu so that schools could develop capability, and this way of teaching in the mathematics curriculum could be supported by the profession, and that occurred. We had pretty good support through the mid-early 2000s, and it sort of ceased around 2008, 2009. And since then, there really hasn't been any support for the numeracy project. The question of whether there is an emphasis on multiple strategies in mathematics, multiple solutions, as opposed to a drive that we're now seeing in many schools wanting to support the teaching of particular ways of solving problems, is causing confusion. Now, the question I think we have as a profession is, what does the curriculum require, and what does quality teaching and learning look like when it comes to the teaching of mathematics, and who is providing that leadership? In our profession, who is it that provides that leadership? Now, many principals will say, well, look, I'm the educational leader in my community, and of course that's true, but we all work in an education system, a national education system that needs to mean something in terms of what we're pulling for collectively as a nation. So what is the organising principle that connects the atomised schools in our system together? We're all islands. We all do things differently. We've all localised our curriculums. what is the organising idea, and who's providing that leadership? So I think that's a really important question brought to the fore by the Numeracy Project Challenge. The second is the big push happening at the moment for the science of reading. So you might be aware that there's a growing group of schools that are really interested in building more scientific approaches to reading. In other words, supporting more phonetic approaches to the teaching of reading. And they are engaging in professional learning to shift their teaching of reading substantially in that direction. This is a really important conversation nationally. Do we value whole language? Do we value the science of reading? Is there a handshake between the two? Is a balanced approach more appropriate? What is the research telling us? And is there a perspective that we would have that we require schools to understand and support? This idea of where is the leadership in curriculum is really important. And finally, the third example is in the area of flexible learning. When we think of flexible learning environments that have grown through our country markedly in the design of schools, are we clear about the pedagogy that is associated with flexible learning that makes this way of working an important way to support? Is this something that we are all encouraged to grow? Or is this just a matter of any school choosing to work in this way if they have the opportunity to? Is there a sense that this is important for us as a country, that we value it, that we need to talk about the risks implicit in this way of working, that we need to work cohesively as a national system of school leaders to address issues of practice when we talk about flexible learning? So I think this idea of what needs to change is not just around what changes in curriculum, it's also around where the leadership is, how we get better connected together, how we plug into each other so that we can support localisation, but do so in a way that is nationally coherent. And if we lack that national coherence, then we really are 2,400 schools pulling for our own agendas. And there's risk in that for young people. We have to be clear about that. So there is an important response, I think, that we might choose to have. Finally, and we're going to talk about this briefly towards the end of our time today. What is it that we wrap around all of this that supports us better? What else apart from curriculum? What else apart from leadership of teaching and learning nationally might we also require to build a really coherent, carefully designed approach to teaching and learning that does nurture that local relevance, but also supports more coherence so that teachers understand what is required of them? Look, finally, I'm very painfully aware that this curriculum refresh and any changes that need to take place to support it, we must be very careful stepping this out and having a very straight and honest conversation with each other about getting this right, because it is absolutely critical that I think in the primary school in particular, given our generalist focus right across curriculum and our love of integration, and of course that's very appropriate, that we revalue the importance of being clear in our teaching goals and our teaching metal about what it is that we are teaching, because that does inform how we go about working with young people and growing agency. The two work together. Of course, for many of our secondary teachers who work in subject areas that have a deep understanding of the knowledge relative to the subjects they're teaching, there's a very important challenge that they embrace the localisation of contexts, that they embrace the student agency that presents, that there's a way of finding that sense of relevance and greater connection to young people. These are goals that every teacher confronts right across the profession. But it's very important that we make sure that this conversation doesn't fall to the binary arm wrestle between a knowledge curriculum or a local curriculum that supports agency and relevance. We must be really careful to have a brave conversation about this and try and find ways to power up our teachers, but also insist that we don't lose what is wonderful about the New Zealand curriculum, and that is the fact that it has enabled us to make it more relevant and connected to young people. That's part of the beauty of that curriculum, and we want to make sure we hold on to that. So there's a really important job here. I think there are other things that support this work and that have relevance. One, of course, is the regeneration or the re-establishment of powerful sector-based advisory support. Now, we lost this in our country a good sort of 10, 12 years ago. And from my perspective, it's no surprise that we find ourselves struggling with coherence, because we haven't got those national experts that are practicing leaders. They're teachers, they're lead teachers, they're deputy principals, assistant principals, and principals who are recognised experts in the area of their own teaching and learning and pedagogical capability. And we need to find those people. We need to support them into national roles to get them to advise schools on the growth of quality work with young people. We don't have that in our system. We are absolutely islands, and it's crazy in my view. It's an opportunity we need to find our way back to help our ministry rediscover the importance of a relationship with the sector. That is key. The other problem we have is we have a significant marketplace, market-driven professional learning model. Every school has the capacity to choose a provider. The providers are accredited, but more often than not on their qualifications, not on the quality or content of the provision of their support. Is it any wonder that we have vast differences in the quality of teaching and learning when we actually have very little coherent national support in teaching and learning goals that are really important and meaningful? So we have to find a way of that advisory support being plugged into professional learning. There needs to be a clear plug-in so that what we agree we want to grow, the areas that we want to attack, the change that we want to see can be enacted. It can be supported in a nationally coherent way. None of that infringes on schools' local capacity to bring meaning to what learning looks like locally. That's our job. Our job as teachers is to be powerful with young people, to grow energetic and enterprising and engaging ways of getting into learning. None of that is going to be compromised. I don't believe it will be. But I think we do need, hand on our heart, to say we've got to strengthen up that curriculum. And the better we do it, I think the better teacher I will be, because I will be clearer about what my job is. And we must not ever view teaching and the teaching goals that we hold as a dirty word. Teaching is not subjugated to learning. It's hand in hand. It's both. Both are important. And we need to power both up. And that's a really important job of the system.